Hi, this is Kokudo, and I'm back with another Through the Ages video. This video will cover the last 3-player game I played in round 2 of the 2026 World Championships. This game is between me, FatHope, and Sazmer, who are probably the 2 players, most likely to overcome me in first. At this point in the group, I was definitely in a dominant position. I had won all 4 of the first 4 games. That being said, it's not like they were all dominant victories. The second 4-player game in particular was very close, and I could have easily gotten in second or even third in that one. And my victory in the group is definitely not decided yet either. So it's pretty, so this game, might not necessarily decide who wins, but it will decide if I can finish first in this group, then it means that no matter what the results of the 3-player games are, I could lose, no matter what the results of the 2-player games are, I could lose all 3 of my 2-player games and still finish first. However, if I don't finish first in this game, then I would need to finish first in at least one of my 2-player games. So winning this game would not only be good in general, it would also provide a direct benefit of basically meaning I could relax a little bit and not have to worry too much about the 2-player games, which would be sort of a nice load off my mind before round 3. However, like I said, it will be difficult for me to do because I'm against, like I said, the 2 players who have been doing best in this group so far. Anyway, I'm playing third. We'll take a quick look at the leaders and wonders. In Age 3, what strikes to me is there's a lot of science-focused leaders. Gates, Einstein, Jobs, and Sid Meier all care about science, and there's a spaceflight to go with them too. So a science-based strategy could definitely work out very well. There's also 2 theater leaders in Fleming and Chaplin. No Hollywood, though. There isn't internet. Notably, there's Gandhi without any of the aggressive cards. There's no Churchill or Manhattan Project, so going hard military Age 3 might be harder than it usually is. In Age 2, there aren't that many great wonders. Railroad is the only, I would say, top-tier wonder in this deck. As for the leaders, we can see there are actually 3 culture leaders, Shakespeare, Bach, and Gaudi, so those could potentially transition into a Fleming or Chaplin. There's also Newton as a strong economic leader. Napoleon can get some strength going, although again, Gandhi on the deck, but maybe Napoleon can also help you war against Gandhi, potentially. Maria and Nobel are always strong leaders. In Age 1, the leaders look to be roughly a balance between leaders who like to be elected early and leaders like to be elected late, so that shouldn't affect the Age 8 choice of leader too much. The wonders, however, aren't the best. They're kind of like Age 2, I would say. Both the Age 1 and Age 2 wonder decks are not that great, which means Iron, notably, is a less high-value card than it normally is. To get started in the game, FatHope interestingly takes Alexander over Hippocrates. I think this is a very defensible preference, though. Sazmer does take Hippocrates plus Urban Growth. I think that's also defensible, but that leaves me with kind of an interesting choice of what to do. I could take Sun Tzu, but I think with FatHope and Sazmer already having both taken leaders, that means that I should definitely be able to get, well, I'll definitely be able to get Sun Tzu for 1 civil action next turn if I don't take him, so there's no real reason to take him. I might as well take a wonder. I think all 3 of these wonders, though, are justifiable picks. Maybe Colossus less so. It's not a great Colossus deck. There's no Suez Canal. There are a couple military leaders in Age 1, but there's also Nostradamus. So the choice is probably more between Roman Roads and Hanging Gardens. Obviously, Roman Roads is generally a better wonder than Hanging Gardens. However, if I take Hanging Gardens, I can also get the Engineering Genius with it. It was a pretty close decision for me. It's basically a decision, right, between Hanging Gardens for 4 rocks and a Roman Roads for 5 rocks. In the end, I decided that Hanging Gardens for 4 rocks was a bit better. I think it's pretty good in 3-player games because you can take in 3-player, the military advantage you get to still matters a fair amount, and there's also less chance than in a 4-player game of getting hit by a Ravages of Time. And like I said, just getting it together with the Engineering Genius, it means that I'm denying the Engineering Genius to my opponents as well. Felt just a bit better than taking the Roman Roads. Yeah. But it was a close decision. Age 1 begins. FatHope elects Alexander, and interestingly doesn't take the Colossus, but it is true that with me having taken Hanging Gardens, Sazmer will probably take Roman Roads. It looks like FatHope should be able to get either Library or Stonehenge next turn, and I understand valuing those over the Colossus. FatHope is also able to get a good HA yellow card without extra civil action that they can use immediately next turn, so I think this is a very defensible play, even though I think Colossus would also have been strong in FatHope's position. Playing first, Sazmer elects Hippocrates and otherwise does normal stuff, takes the Roman Roads as expected. This leaves me with a choice between Confucius and Sun Tzu. I think Sun Tzu can definitely be defended here, actually. Even though Confucius is a better leader in a vacuum, Sun Tzu pairs pretty well with the Hanging Gardens, letting you push military more. There's also Yan Zizka in the deck, notably, for obviously great synergy with Sun Tzu. Genghis Khan is also good synergy with Sun Tzu. You don't have a Suez Canal, though, unfortunately, in H2, or Columbus. So not great Sun Tzu synergy, but pretty good ones. And so for that reason, I think Sun Tzu is a defensible take here. However, I did end up going with Confucius. I think maybe in a 4-player game, Sun Tzu might have been preferable because military matters more there. But I think in a 3-player game, the extra economy and science you get from Confucius is still more valuable. Otherwise, I do normal things, build a mine, increase my population. I draw a rat in the scientific breakthrough. Fat Hope uses kills Alexander immediately to get an extra yellow token that they'll also immediately find value of by being able to build a lab and increase the population without being in consumption, so I think that was the right decision. Taking Library of Alexandria over Stonehenge I think is also right, especially losing a civil action with Alexander. The extra civil action cost to complete Stonehenge would be a real downside. And with the last civil action, they are civil action efficient. The urban growth they took last turn enables them to just build the first stage of library this turn. I think this is a very good turn from Fat Hope. Sazmar Seeds reveals the development of agriculture. Sazmar takes irrigation and Joan of Arc, potentially planning for a bit of a military push. And then builds a second lab and increases the population. Going into consumption early is more justifiable with both Roman roads and an early irrigation, so I think this is a good turn from Sazmar. It does mean they pass up the swordsman. Maybe they already have a knight's tactic, or maybe they just don't value swordsman that much. Or maybe they just think irrigation is better, which is understandable. I just like to see the rats here maybe a little counterintuitive with me having Hanging Gardens, but I actually think Hanging Gardens pairs really well with the rats. And my logic for that is Hanging Gardens I think makes it much easier to control your level of food. So if you think about it with the rats, you know, if you start your turn with 1 or 2 food, then rats will hit you by kind of a lot. However, with Hanging Gardens, if you start your turn with 1 or 2 food and you complete Hanging Gardens, then you'll be able to spend that food, right? You'll basically, because you'll get the 2 food and be able to increase your population. So I actually think Hanging Gardens letting you control your control the amount of food you have, right? If you have 3 food and can pop anyway, then you don't have to complete Hanging Gardens. Also, if you have 0 food, you don't complete, just in general, you don't have to complete Hanging Gardens. Because if you have 1 or 2 food, then it'll actually save you 1 food on the rats, right? So I think rats is actually quite strong with Hanging Gardens. It's also even better to seed rats here, I think, because Sazmar took the irrigation, and Fat Hope will have extra food thanks to Alexander. I end up revealing development of planning. Also, I didn't want to see the development of the scientific breakthrough necessarily, because Fat Hope has a science wonder and I don't. Anyway, the development of planning options are religion, science, and crafts. I actually, as you can see, ended up taking crafts over religion, maybe a little bit unexpectedly. I think religion is usually considered the strong development, and I think it usually is. However, I think with Hanging Gardens, the development of religion becomes much less attractive. It is true there's no pier in this game, so I'm not necessarily aiming for arenas. However, I do think one of the main values of Hanging Gardens, maybe the main value, is the 2 happy faces means that you can put all of your population into non-happy face stuff until age 2. And so for that reason, development of religion, while not bad with Hanging Gardens, obviously, I mean, it's still, you know, you can have it around, you can get this 3rd happy face, which can be useful sometimes. It's definitely lower value than it normally is. And if I had taken it, then I would have also had to, you know, either not build the second lab this turn or go into consumption in order to build the lab. I also, I think, had, yeah, so those would also have been downsides of taking the development of religion, especially since the development of religion is off of planning. I can instead take the development of crafts and just get 2 rocks, which is 1 rock less than development of religion, but it doesn't commit my population to a temple when I won't need it in that temple thanks to Hanging Gardens. So that's why I think with Hanging Gardens, when you have a choice like this not to take development of religion, since it's part of planning, I think it's oftentimes right to take something else. And I chose crafts over science because I have Confucius, so I figured I probably have enough science already. Especially since I'm building the second lab this turn. I guess I'm going into consumption anyway, but so yeah, that thing I said earlier isn't really a reason to take crafts over religion. It's mostly again that I just didn't want the population in a temple right now. I had kind of a difficult choice as to which cards to take here, though. I really wanted this Code of Laws that I can take for 1 civil action. With Confucius next turn, I will have enough science to play it, which seemed very strong. However, the downside is it means that Fat Hope will be able to get Saladin for 1 civil action, and I think when you have Alexander or Hippocrates, getting an early 1 civil action Saladin is kind of like the lottery. It's like exactly what you want, and it felt kind of bad giving that to Fat Hope. However, if I passed up this Code of Laws, that means Fat Hope would get the Code of Laws for 1 civil action, and thanks to Library, they'll have a lot of science, they'll definitely be able to play the Code of Laws relatively easily, so that would also be a sacrifice, and so that would also be good for Fat Hope. You know, maybe less good than Saladin is, but also the Code of Laws is really good for me. I could have taken Saladin myself, but along with the Code of Laws, I also did want the copy of Swordsman. I don't have a tactic in my hand right now. It felt kind of risky to just pass up the Swordsman and risk, you know, maybe not having it when I draw an infantry tactic or something. And so I just figured that taking these 2 techs, even though Saladin would have been a good leader for me, we can see there are 2 other good leaders already on the row, one of whom I will definitely be, well, almost certainly be able to get for 1 civil action next turn anyway, so that's 1 civil action cheaper than Saladin. And so for those reasons, I felt that even though Saladin would be a good denial to Fat Hope, this is also denial and just a bit better for me since it's available for 1 civil action less. I draw an aggression and that tactic. Fat Hope finishes the library and interestingly doesn't take Saladin. The Fat Hope could have very easily taken an elected Saladin this turn, but instead they take the Engineering Genius. The Engineering Genius is definitely a powerful yellow card, so I can understand wanting it. However, I think in Fat Hope's situation, when you're without a leader, I mean, you generally, you know, leaders are probably the highest value card in Through the Ages, at least relative to the resources you put into them, because they literally cost nothing other than civil actions. So being without a leader for any amount of time is something you generally want to avoid, especially in a situation like this where Fat Hope could very easily take and play a high value leader. I think that's just a lot better than this 2 civil action Engineering Genius. Fat Hope plays a medieval army to keep the other 3 cards in their hand. Sazmar Seas reveals the development of politics. The cards I draw off of it are another aggression, a crusades, and a border conflict. Sazmar Lecture of Arc builds 1 station of Roman roads, increase the population, and builds 2 more. They unfortunately don't have enough rocks to finish Roman roads this turn. But they decide again, you know, they can't obviously take either of these leaders. Sazmar maybe could have taken the masonry here instead. Sazmar had not built any stages of the Roman roads yet this turn, so the masonry would have basically been civil action cost 0, because it would have cost 2 to take and play, but then save 2 on the Roman roads, and then obviously benefited Sazmar later. So it would have been 3 science. You know, Sazmar is only, you know, doesn't have that much science, so maybe they were worried about that, but I think the masonry seems really strong for them here, personally. I decided to see the border conflict. I'm planning to take Jan Ziska this turn and talk about that in a bit. And Jan Ziska with the fighting band and the swordsman felt pretty strong, so I thought chances were likely that I would at least not lose the border conflict and might even win it. I revealed development of warfare that I'm able to take. So, you know, these are obviously 3 very strong leaders, all for 1 civil action. So I wanted to take one of them for sure. The question was only which one. I think they are all, like I said, quite strong and could all definitely be defended. I think the main reason to take either Ziska or Nostradamus over Saladin is because Saladin will be discarded after my turn. So, if I took Saladin, Fat Hope would have a choice between Nostradamus and Ziska, could take whichever one seemed best to them, but by taking one of them, I forced Fat Hope into taking the other. And since they all seemed, you know, pretty roughly similar, Saladin doesn't really seem significantly better than Jan Ziska, who I ended up taking. I felt that the denial value was strong enough to make that tiebreak. As for Jan Ziska versus Nostradamus, I think the major reason I took Jan Ziska is because I have the Code of Laws, but no way to get a 3rd military action. With Nostradamus, when you have Nostradamus with 2 military actions, I mean, it can be fine. You know, you have the extra defensive strength and the knowledge of the event deck. Those are both very strong qualities of Nostradamus, but it does mean that you're less likely to be able to seed every turn, so that definitely costs some, denies some of the Nostradamus value. Yanziska giving me a third military action when I currently have no other way to get that third military action just seemed a bit better, and I thought Yanziska should be able to offer me a similar amount of strength. I'm gonna be able to get 4 population in my military, meaning that, well, I guess Yanziska would give me 1 additional strength, whereas Nostradamus would give me 3, so, and that, but it was also, obviously, strength and not defensive strength, so, but it was mainly, I think, the third military action that made me decide on Ziska here. I don't elect Ziska yet, though, I don't need him quite yet, instead I play the Code of Laws, because next turn I will be able to seed to get 3 science and then replace Confucius for a 4th science that I'll be able to use to play the Swordsman if I decide I have to. I then end up taking the Iron over the Irrigation. Irrigation could definitely be defended here. I could take the Irrigation and just build 1 stage of my Wonder, for example. However, because I wouldn't be able, because I'm not probably, I mean, I could play the Irrigation next turn. I mean, I'm getting a little extra food from the Hanging Gardens, though. There's also rats on the deck, so I'd want to delay Irrigation a little bit for that reason as well. In addition, Sazmar has already taken an Irrigation, meaning that I will most likely be able to get the selective breeding regardless, because Sazmar probably isn't going to take the selective breeding. So that made Irrigation a bit less value, since I could just wait for the selective breeding. With Hanging Gardens, I should be able to get enough population to at least serve me through the first half of H2 or so. And so for those reasons, Iron just felt a bit better. However, as I said before, this isn't really something I had in mind during the game, but looking at it in retrospect, because the Wonder is a kind of low value, that does make Iron lower value, maybe that would have justified taking the Irrigation instead, just to be a bit more civil action efficient, and also because Irrigation does pair well with the Yanziska, because you can build 3 Irrigation farms to have the same amount as 2 selective breedings, and Ziska rewards you for putting another population into farms, so maybe Irrigation would have actually been a bit better than Iron in retrospect. I think it's quite close, though. I play the Fighting Band to keep more cards in my hand. With me already having the Swordsman, there's no reason not to play it. I discard my 2 aggressions, because it seemed unlikely I would play them. Both of these cards seem like potential seeds to me. And I draw another Fighting Band tactic. A little funny. Fat Hope offers me a trade agreement, so Fat Hope can use food as rocks, and I can use rocks as food. I think this is actually a quite good pact for me, for a couple of reasons. First of all, again, Hanging Gardens lets me manipulate my food better, and it felt like it was pretty likely that I would be in a situation where this pact would let me get an additional population. And in addition, because I know the rats is coming, that means that Fat Hope is less likely to have free food lying around to use this pact with than they would normally. And so for those 2 reasons, I thought that this pact was probably actually better for me than for Fat Hope, or at least about equal, so I was happy to accept it. Fat Hope takes Nostradamus, unsurprisingly, and increases the population twice to get out of corruption. Seems like a fine turn. Sazmar Seeds reveals the development of settlement, and the event deck flips. Sazmar finishes their Wonder, upgrades a farm, and takes a Patriotism. Valued the extra military action more than the flexibility of reserves. With Sazmar already having 3 military actions, maybe the resource would be a bit better, but they're basically, if Sazmar was confident that they wanted to spend this on the military, then it is indeed better. So I think that's justifiable. That they do, however, pass up the theology, despite having shown, though, notably. I decided to seed my tactic. I didn't, I'll talk about this in a bit later, but I decided to not take an alchemy, so scientific breakthrough felt a bit bad for that reason. Crusades felt risky, so I just seeded the neutral event. I reveal Thwarway, which is nice for me. And so I can get out of corruption. So we can see the turn that I end up taking. Where I finish my Wonder, and then elect Ziska, and build 2 Swordsmen to get up to 9 strength. I think this is definitely a strong turn in various ways. Obviously, it really pushes my strength, making me pretty significantly ahead of my opponents. However, there is a weakness, obviously, which is that I don't take this alchemy. And I think my logic at the time was I already have an iron that I can use for economic upgrades, and so it might be a while before I could get alchemy upgrades anyway, so it might just be better to wait for scientific method, especially with Newton as a potential leader. And I think that logic is justified, and this is a justified play. However, there were a couple things that I failed to consider, which is, it's gonna be a little while before I can play the iron. Right now, I do know that there's a Confucius event coming, which means that I will be able to play the iron 2 turns from now. But that's still, you know, 2 turns from now, right? I don't have a clear plan for anything that I'll be able to do necessarily next turn. And in particular, how can I spend these 5 civil actions efficiently next turn? With me only having this iron in hand, there's not a clear way for that to happen at the present point in time. I also think this was an earlier strength push than I perhaps needed to do. I was already at 3 strength without this. I didn't have to do this, right? I could have just, you know, put another warrior or something to be stronger than Sasmer for the next turn cycle. And by keeping Confucius for another turn, I would have been able to get another science out of him, which could have definitely been useful. And instead of finishing the wonder, maybe I could have found a way to take an alchemy instead, with the plan being to, like, I haven't really walked through it, but I think maybe I could have taken the alchemy, played it, upgraded 1 alchemy, increased my population, put that population into my warrior. I think that should have been enough. Yeah, definitely would have been enough to get out of corruption. And so what that would have done was allow me to get more science income. By playing the alchemy, I would have had 3 science next turn, 5 science after seeding and then replacing Confucius. That would have been enough to then play the swordsman next turn, and then I would have had the science income. I would have been at 1 science with 4 extra, so I wouldn't necessarily have been able to play the iron next turn, but I would have been able to play the iron next turn actually with the Confucius event coming. So by upgrading 1 alchemy this turn, I would have been able to still play the swordsman next turn, and then the iron the turn after that. So I would have only delayed the swordsman 1 turn, and again, I didn't really need the swordsman this turn anyway. So I think in retrospect, this was actually a pretty significant mistake on my end, and I should have started my alchemy upgrades instead, because by thinking it through like I just did, I could have seen that getting the alchemy upgrade this turn wouldn't have delayed my strength push next turn. Anyway, I draw a cultural influence. Fat Hope Seeds reveals an inhabited territory. I didn't draw any bonus cards, so I wasn't able to build too much to bid too much for it. At least Sasmer, not having a tactic, had to put in a fair amount of resources into it. Actually, 2 units and 2 bonus cards. That's quite a lot. Fat Hope is able to build 2 knights as well as take the alchemy, putting Fat Hope at a lot of strength right now. Sasmer now is also able to play the knights, and we can see that Sasmer had a plan with that patriotism. As a matter of fact, a plan with the patriotism and the huge bid, that inhabited territory was probably Sasmer's card, because with the patriotism, Sasmer has just enough rocks and military actions to build 3 knights and play a heavy cavalry tactic. So Sasmer is able to jump strength really quickly in 1 turn as well. So that's definitely a really strong turn from both of my opponents that I have to respond to. I don't want to seed since I'm weakest. What I am able to do is build another swordsman, then upgrade 1 to be at 12 strength at least. So at least 1 benefit. While I do think it overall would have been better to take the alchemy, at least I am able to be strongest on the next turn cycle because I went for warriors instead on my previous turn. For swordsman instead of my previous turn. Unfortunately, the cost of this is that it doesn't use any civil actions, and I have to decide what do I want to spend my civil actions on. I can, of course, take all 3 of these yellow cards. I think they all should be useful for me, especially the cultural heritage and the rich land. Urban growth, maybe, you know, its usefulness is farther in the future, but I will definitely be able to use it eventually, at least. But even while taking these 3 yellow cards, that still leaves me with 2 civil actions left, and not any way to spend them except taking cards. I also didn't want any of these technology cards. I didn't want any happy face technologies when I have the Hanging Gardens. The cartography, I'm pretty short on science right now. I want to play the iron next turn. It just didn't seem worth it to me. So I ended up doing something which is kind of not good, but kind of my only option, which is to take the Taj Mahal for 2 civil actions. I had kind of a whole Taj Mahal speech in my previous video, so you can watch that video if you want the details. But basically, I've come to the conclusion that Taj Mahal is actually like a pretty good wonder and not too bad, but that's only if you take Taj Mahal for 0 civil actions. That's really what makes it useful. When you take it for 2 civil actions like I just did, then it really is kind of the worst wonder in the game. But I really didn't have anything better to do with these 2 civil actions, as we can see. I didn't want to clog my hand with any of these techs. At least the Taj Mahal is able to sit on my board without clogging up my hand. And it'll be a potential way to sink in rocks in the future if I have no other way, especially since I'm a little low on science right now. So it seemed at least better than nothing. You know, it does take my wonder slot, but as we already saw, the H2 wonders aren't that great anyway. So that's not such a big cost. So I do think taking the Taj Mahal for 2 civil actions, like, is the right play, given the context of this turn. I think the fact that I'm doing it, what it really shows, again, is that my previous turn was incorrect. Because if I had taken the alchemy on my previous turn, then I would have had much more useful things to do with my civil actions this turn than taking the Taj Mahal. It's because I didn't take the alchemy. So it was really, my mistake was really on the previous turn and not taking the alchemy. That's what led to this inefficient play on this turn. So that's a lesson to me that I need to sort of think more about, like, what I might be using my civil actions on the following turn. That's a major part of civil action efficiency. At least I draw a bonus card. Fat Hope Seeds reveals my rats, so it ends up hitting me for 2 food, unfortunately. At least it hits both my opponents for at least that much. Fat Hope has the science for the cartography and the Brennan circuses, and they also play both of them, not having anything else too useful to do with their civil actions. So somebody doesn't seed, instead they take an iron and a rich land and finish upgrading their farms. I think that's a sensible play. On my turn, I do see that was, what was that? I think that was a strength event of some sort, right? My strength position seemed pretty good at this point in time, so I was willing to see the strength event. I revealed with a territory. I wasn't willing to bid on it because I don't have a way to replace that population right now. Fat Hope is able to win it. At least it cost them a bonus card along with the warrior. But I guess it wasn't a strength event. Sorry. I forget what it was now. Was it new deposits? I need to pay better attention. Anyway, moving on. So, unfortunately, my Confucius event is the last card in the deck, meaning if I want to start upgrading irons this turn, which I definitely do, I have to play my Cultural Heritage, but that is also one of the reasons I took the Cultural Heritage, so it becomes useful for me in that sense. That does leave me with 2 civil actions left. I could have, for example, taken the Frugality and built 1 stage of the Taj Mahal, but I didn't want to build 1 stage of the Taj Mahal because I wanted to upgrade both of my mines next turn. That's also why I'm not going to upgrade Warrior into Swordsman. Meaning that even if I took the Frugality, I wouldn't really have anything else that I wanted to do with my civil action, because I can't take either of these cards. Maybe the Printing Press. I mean, Printing Press maybe with Shakespeare, Gotti, or something, but it doesn't look like I'll have a free population for it anytime soon. So I felt that rather than take the Frugality, this breakthrough to fix my science situation a little bit seemed a lot more important. I draw 2 tactics I'm not going to use and another bonus card. H2 begins, so we can take a quick look at everyone's situation. Culture is about equal. I have a little bit of an advantage in culture and culture production than my opponents, but not that much. Science, I'm a little bit behind both of my opponents because of their science wonders, but I have a little bit more rocks than they do in recompense because I've started my iron upgrades. Sazmar might start their iron upgrades this turn, though. Sazmar also has a food upgrade, so the food combined with the iron soon means that Sazmar, I think, does have the strongest economy right now, as well as a pretty good strength position. However, I at least have 1 more civil action than my opponents do, so that's an advantage on my end. Fat Hope maybe is kinda in the weakest position right now, but they do have Nostradamus, and they will be getting alchemies going soon, so I think actually everyone's situation is, like, pretty even right now. Like, quite close, and so it'll really depend on how we all navigate these early turns in H2. Anyway, Fat Hope reveals the border conflict that I'm able to win, so that's good for me, for sure. Fat Hope takes the Himeji Castle and is able to complete it this turn, so that will allow Fat Hope to compete much better in strength. Fat Hope is now no longer the weakest, notably, because of Nostradamus. So that's a good play for Fat Hope, I think. Sazmar Seeds reveals the... Oh, this was what I seeded. Yeah, the culture influence. It's obviously a little bit better for me than for my opponents. Sazmer takes Machu Picchu, seems like a good window for them. They rebuild the mine that they had presumably lost to the border conflict. Yeah, they don't have the science to play iron this turn, unfortunately. And they take a drama. Maybe looking ahead to the Shakespeare that's on the row. We've seen before that Sazmer really likes Shakespeare. I decided to see the Crusades. At this point, I was pretty confident in my strength situation, but the card that was revealed lost me that confidence pretty quickly. Unfortunately, because Fat Hope built the Himeji Castle last turn, I am now one of the 2 weakest and the culture leader, meaning that I have to lose a population to barbarians. And this is especially bad for me because it means I either have to lose an economic building or I have to go down to 11 strength, which even though it's -1 strength, that 1 strength makes a really huge difference right now because it means that after my turn, I will be the weakest. Maybe I could have, you know, destroyed one of my buildings to ensure that I wouldn't become the weakest, but that just felt like really like cutting off my nose to spite my face. You know, all of my economic buildings are pretty important for me. Losing a lab would put me down to only 1 science production. I'm about to finish upgrading my mines, so losing them also felt really bad. So I figured that just losing the population and, you know, kind of hoping that I would be able to survive whatever strength events it might become is the least bad option for me at this point in time. Anyway, after upgrading my mines, I decided to take this engineering genius, and build 1 stage of the Taj Mahal. This, on the other hand, is pretty questionable to me. I mean, my science situation is still pretty bad. It is true that the engineering genius will be immediately useful soon, so it's, whereas the breakthrough, I already have a breakthrough in my hand. On the other hand, my science situation is kinda my weakest point right now, other than, you know, my strength situation due to the barbarians. So I think taking maybe taking this breakthrough instead of building the stage of the Taj Mahal. I didn't need to do this to get out of corruption. It doesn't actually help my corruption situation at all regardless. So I didn't need to do that. I could have definitely just taken this breakthrough instead. I still would have had 1 open hand space that I could then get rid of those breakthroughs by playing text later. So I think this was definitely a mistake on my end, being a little too intent on civil action efficiency when it's possible that these 2 rocks in the Taj Mahal, maybe I would want to use them for something else next turn. I just got both tactics that I didn't want to use. I draw an aggression, a war, and a historic territory. Fat Hope Seas, unfortunately, is another strength event that now hits me because of the barbarians, so I lose a yellow token. Sazmer gains 1. Fat Hope takes that Age 2 breakthrough, upgrades a lab, and builds an arena, perhaps scared of rebellion, or maybe that's a sign. I mean, with Fat Hope having the Shadamas, this should probably be a sign that there's a good chance rebellion is in the deck somewhere. Sazmer Seeds, and unfortunately it's yet another strength event, so I am hit by 3 strength events in a row, and not only that, it's in the worst order for me possible, because if the Barbarians had been last instead, then the first 2 strength events would not have hit me. So the Barbarians being first, followed by the remaining 2 strength events, is as bad as it could possibly be for me, unfortunately. But that's how it goes sometimes, so that puts me in a pretty much worse position now after those 2 strength events. Sazmer plays a drama, and indeed does take Shakespeare. Sazmer definitely seems to like this leader a lot. They are able also to get a journalism with it, and I actually do think, while maybe Sazmer is biased towards Shakespeare, this does seem like a good Shakespeare position. Sazmer has the population for him, obviously. Sazmer is in a good strength situation as well, and Sazmer is able to take all of these for 1 civil action each. Sazmer will have the economy for him after Machu Picchu. Sazmer, instead of doing this, could have, like, played the iron this turn and gotten some iron upgrades in, so that is a sacrifice that Sazmer makes by doing Shakespeare instead. However, I do think this is a position where Shakespeare looks like he could be quite good. And Sazmer builds a knight to be strongest. Unfortunately, the result of doing the Shakespeare plays does mean that Sazmer will have to take corruption this turn, so that's definitely a major sacrifice they made to take the Shakespeare cards. I don't see, because I'm weakest. As you can see, I decided to lose another military unit to the Reign of Terror. I'm weakest anyway, so becoming even weaker, it didn't seem like too much of a sacrifice. Thanks to my bonus cards, I'm still able to defend against Sazmer, any aggressions from Sazmer. There are a bunch of cards in the row right now that could be really good for me. Newton will be extremely good for me once I get my scientific methods. Strategy, obviously, always really good. You know, architecture, probably not, but definitely these 2, I did strongly consider. But in the end, I decided that the selective breeding is just really important for me. After having been hit by those 2 population reducing events, I really need some extra pop going so that I can compete with strength with my opponents more. And by upgrading a farm this turn, thanks to that trader's agreement, I will be able to increase my population next turn if I upgrade a farm this turn, and that just seemed too good to pass up. And this means that I still have 1 civil action left. If I hadn't built the stage of the Taj Mahal, then I would have had the option to upgrade my farm once more. So we can see that's like a downside of me doing this, right, is that I don't have that option. On the other hand, at the very least, I have something else really good that I can do with my last civil action instead of upgrading this farm, and that is to take the cannon. I don't have an H2 tactic yet, so in that situation, you know, making sure that cannon is in hand, just in case, can be extremely important. And thanks to the trade routes agreement, I'll be able to increase my population once next turn anyway. I discard the territory. Doesn't seem good to see when Fat Hope has the cartography. The aggression and the war seem like it would take a long time for them to be useful for me. I draw an arms industry, a politics strength, and I am immediately rewarded for getting that cannon. So while this order of the event deck was extremely unfortunate for me, I am fortunate to draw this defensive army tactic as my second draw of H2. You know, I take it's the best tactic I could possibly have drawn, also with me having gotten the cannon. So that's fortunate. Fat Hope Seeds reveals a Confucius event. Event deck flips. Fat Hope is obviously happy to take the strategy that I didn't take. Fat Hope maybe could have considered taking Newton here, but instead Fat Hope decides to take architecture. I think this is probably kind of greedy. Fat Hope doesn't have that much science. They're gonna need the coal and the selective breakthrough and maybe a rifleman or something later. So I think this is pretty greedy. I think Newton would have been a good leader for Fat Hope. Newton would have made up for Fat Hope's only having 4 civil actions a lot, so I probably would have done that. And probably even elected Newton this turn, because Fat Hope doesn't need the Nostradamus strength anymore, and the event deck just flipped, so they have full knowledge of this event deck. They are, however, being pretty militarily threatening to me right now. Sazmar Seeds reveals a rebellion, maybe not unexpectedly, because of how Fat Hope played the previous turn. It does not hit anyone, though. Sazmar upgrades 2 iron mines and takes a rifleman. That seems good. It's my turn. I still don't want to seed because I'm weakest. I am able at least to rebuild one of my swordsmen so that I am... well, we can see this turn I get some immediate benefit from defensive army even without being able to play the cannons yet, because Yanziska is able to turn farms into cannons too. And so in a bit we'll see, after I play this tactic, I will not actually be vulnerable to an aggression from my opponents. I'll be up to 14 strength. I won't even be weakest. So this was definitely the best possible draw I could have had in the entire deck. That was very lucky. Makes up for the being unlucky in the event deck order. Anyway, after upgrading my last farm, I take the Kanman. This is also a card that I really want. I obviously need a government form. This is the best government form I could ask for, available for 1 civil action. No reason not to take it, I think. And then I decide to just build a station on the Taj Mahal, planning to finish it next turn. You know, there's not anything else that I would obviously want to use it. I also, you know, I don't, again, my science is low. I don't really want these technologies. And I could have maybe taken the efficient upgrade, but I figured this patriotism is going to be at least as useful for me, because I'm definitely, once I replace the Yanziska, I'm going to need to build some cannons, and so the patriotism will make it a lot easier for me to build the cannons. Efficient upgrade, you know, I'm not sure when I'll be able to get those scientific methods. So that's why I take the patriotism and built the stage of the Taj Mahal, planning to finish it next turn. But yeah, the defensive army, Yanziska is able to turn these farms into cannons, so I'm able to get 6 strength, 2 of these outdated armies out of it, pushing me up to 14. So that's definitely good. I discarded the arms industry. My Sazmar probably gonna, once Sazmar plays Rifleman, I would not have any rocks in the arms industry yet. Maybe I would with the cannons, but it still doesn't seem too good. Strength event seemed pretty risky at this point in time. Scientific breakthrough, I figured I wanted to wait to seed. Once they got the scientific methods going, it'll be very strong. And I draw the second war over territory. Fat Hope Seeds reveals the Crusades. Thankfully, because of the defensive army tactic, it does not hit me. So that's kind of an 8 culture swing against Sazmar for me, right? Because instead of me losing 4 cultures, Sazmar loses 4 culture. So that's could definitely be relevant. Fat Hope takes coal, upgrades one coal mine, and takes an investment upgrade for future coal upgrades. That seems good. Sazmo takes the second Kanmon. Notably, by doing this, you know, Fat Hope did pass up the Republic, though, but there is gonna be, and the first Republic was actually discarded, so that's one risk that Fat Hope took, but it is true the Republic, you know, the cards that Fat Hope took were also very strong, so I understand that play. Fat Hope should be able to get the Republic next turn anyway, after Sazmo upgrades the economy a little bit more. I take this opportunity to see the scientific breakthrough. There's a scientific method on the row that I will be taking this turn to talk about that later, and I'm also not even weakest. What I reveal is the civil unrest, which doesn't hit anyone. I do have some options here other than taking the scientific method, but in the, like, for example, I could have finished Taj Mahal and then taken, well, I couldn't have taken both reserves and scientific method. I don't have the hand space, but I could have, you know, yeah, I could have done some other things, but in the end I decided that getting this scientific method upgrades going earlier was just too important to pass up. I'm gonna really want science for the Kanmon and the cannon. I just seeded the scientific breakthrough, so science is kinda... well, I have a couple issues, but the biggest one was probably my science situation, so getting my science situation fixed post-haste seemed too important to pass up, even though I had to pay a lot of civil actions for it. I drew a Promise of Military Protection, a bonus card, and a Scientific Cooperation, so 2 interesting packs. Fat Hope sees, unfortunately, it's the Ravages of Time. The worst event you can see when you have Hanging Gardens, and especially for me, because I was 1 civil action short of finishing the Taj Mahal last turn. If I had finished the Taj Mahal, I could have destroyed the Taj Mahal to the Ravages of Time, which I definitely would have, but I won't have that option because it's revealed too soon for that. So that's definitely going to be really bad for me, and sort of, you know, the final blow in this very rough Age 2 event deck for me. Fat Hope decides to take the Transcontinental Railroad instead of upgrading one of their mines. It's definitely a strong winner for them. On the other hand, it's a pretty significant cost to play it instead of upgrading a mine. And not only does Fat Hope not able to upgrade the mine, they're also not able to take this Republic, which is the last Age 2 government. So with this, Fat Hope is going to be stuck at despotism until Age 3 and be hoping for an Age 3 government form. That's definitely risky. I think passing up the upgrade and the Republic is probably too much in my opinion, and I think that Fat Hope should have, by upgrading, they could have spent the efficient upgrade too, so they could have, instead of spending 3 civil actions on this, they could have upgraded the mine and taken the Republic and the reserves, which I think would have been a lot better. Not a lot better. I mean, yes, the railroad is definitely good for them, but I just think it's too costly, especially when they have to give up the Republic for it. Maybe I would have even taken the Republic over Riflemen, frankly. But that's also a hard decision. Anyway, Sazmo sees, despite being weakest, but of course with Joan, they know that the card isn't a strength event. Instead, it's a developed territory, which I was able to bid a fair amount on, but I didn't want to bid too much because my strength situation is still kind of sketchy. Therefore, Fat Hope is able to win it. At least they have to spend, well, Fat Hope actually ended up trying four bonus cards, which is kind of nuts. So they're actually able to win it only for 1 warrior, which is really good. Anyway, Sazmo finishes the their wonder and just increased the population. So that's a fine turn, I think. I don't have any vessel seed. Instead, I offer the Promise of Military Protection. We're going to see this turn I will be replacing Yanziska because he'll be dead by my next turn anyway. And with Yanziska gone and me being one science short of playing the cannons, my strength is going to go down quite significantly. So this Promise of Military Protection is going to be very valuable for me in not being at risk of aggressions until I manage to build some actual cannons. I decided to offer it to Sazmo instead of Fat Hope because obviously Sazmo has less strength than Fat Hope. So I thought that Fat Hope maybe would reject it because this pact is gonna, you know, maybe threaten Fat Hope's position of being strongest, whereas Sazmo I felt probably didn't expect to be able to overtake Fat Hope in strength, so it seemed more likely that Sazmo would just let me and Fat Hope battle over who's strongest. Anyway, I finished the Taj Mahal before it's destroyed by the end of the age. I'm also able to finish upgrading my labs. I couldn't use the urban growth last turn because it would have put me in corruption, but I am able to use it this turn. I take Napoleon. He seems significantly better than Gandhi in my position. I really need his strength bonus. We can see, thanks to the promise of military protection, I'm able to have a bit more strength than Sasmer. And I have to finish my turn by getting out of Uprising. Unfortunately, losing the Hanging Gardens right now is really bad for me. I passed up an Organized Religion earlier because, you know, neither of my opponents need a Happy Face solution, probably. And so I figured I would be able to get an Organized Religion or Team Sports later for cheaper. Unfortunately, it's kind of coming back to bite me, although it would have been hard to play it this turn anyway, because in order to get out of Uprising, I have no choice but to disband a Swordsman. So we can see that were it not for the promise of military protection, I would have been at 8 strength, and that would have been pretty sketchy, especially with me losing these bonus costs at the end of the age. But instead of I'm at 12, which definitely looks a lot better. Maybe, in retrospect, maybe it was kind of risky to offer this pack to Sasmer instead of Fat Hope. Maybe Fat Hope would have been more likely to accept it after all. I'm not sure. Anyway, I draw a popularization of science in an inhabited territory. Fat Hope Seeds reveals my scientific breakthrough that I was able to wait to reveal until I got my labs upgraded, so that at least is very good for me. I get a lot more out of it than my opponents. Fed Up takes the second copy of Cannons, is able to at least get a lot of significant value out of this architecture by saving civil actions on the railroad. Getting a big strength push, also with the Hussars. So it doesn't see it as dead. They play the government and also Shakespeare, and just increase the population a ton, build a theater and the knights, and then take a breakthrough. Science is definitely Sasmer's weakest point right now, although soon it won't be with the journalism's coming. But it's the best card. You know, they do take this instead of the wave of nationalism, notably. That's arguable, but it is true. I mean, Sasmer has 8 rock income and 2 science income right now, so in that sense, they do need science a lot more than they need rocks. H3 begins. Thanks to yeah, I am able to play the Kanmon this turn thanks to the scientific breakthrough. So saving that scientific breakthrough for so long until pretty much the end of H2 ended up helping me out a lot. So I was pretty happy that I did that. But another thing is I'm able to play both play the Kanmon and play the Team Sports this turn. So I did choose to take the Team Sports over the Organized Religion, even though it costs 2 more civil actions. Discuss a bit. We can see, obviously, you know, playing the Team Sports was pretty much necessary for me in avoiding Uprising. I mainly chose it over the Organized Religion because it gives strength, I think, and also costs less in resources. Pretty, you know, 2 less resources. Even though it costs 5 science, next turn I'll have just enough science to play the cannons anyway. And notably, because this only costs 5 rocks, next turn I'll be able to play the cannons, so I'll have 10 rocks, plus 3 from the patriotism, so that will be just enough rocks to be able to build 1 swordsman and 2 cannons to get 2 armies going. Whereas if I had spent 7 rocks in this Organized Religion, I would have been 2 rocks short of getting 2 armies going. And that, I think, was the main reason why I spent 2 more civil actions on the arena. It's true that I could have taken the Organized Religion and then maybe taking this reserves for another 2 civil actions, but at that point, spending 2 civil actions on the reserves and then playing it, that would have cost 3 civil actions. The Team Sports only costs 1 more civil action than the Organized Religion. So if I'm taking this 2 civil action reserves, that kind of cancels out the civil action benefit of taking this 1 civil action. So I think it was right to take this arena. Also, again, it helps me in strength, which is pretty important for me right now. It means that after taking this urban growth that I want because I'm going to be building a 2nd arena, this 2 strength means that I won't be weakest after my turn as well, which is quite important. I draw an impact of balance, an aggression, and a war. So my first H3 draw is a war. That's always a sign that, you know, especially with me being on Napoleon, maybe wars are in my future. With my turn over, we can take a look at everyone's situation. Oops. So, in terms of culture, I am technically in second, but Sazmer very quickly is gonna start getting Shakespeare duos going. Fat Hope managed, thanks I think mainly to Nostradamus, and to have a significant culture lead at the moment. So in culture right now, I would say, even though right now I'm ahead of Sazmer, pretty soon I'll be in third. My major strength against my opponent is my science, because I have more science production right now. Fat Hope has 12 science on hand, but Fat Hope also doesn't have a government. I'll talk about that later. The rock situation, I'm a bit worse than my opponents on, thanks to their wonders. The food situation, however, is a major issue for Fat Hope. Fat Hope wasn't able to find a chance to get the selective breeding, so Fat Hope is kind of struggling in food right now. It's about equal, you know, Sazmer. Yeah, thanks to Machu Picchu, it's equal for me and Sazmer. So the civil military action situation, Sazmer and I are about the same. Fat Hope is lagging behind, but at least Fat Hope is strongest. So I would say, looking at everyone's position, Fat Hope has good strength. They're going to have really good rock income pretty soon, although they'll be upgrading their mines in Age 3. Their major weakness is definitely their civil and military actions. They were not able to get an H1 or an H2 government, so they're going to have to look for an H3 government to fix their really rough civil action situation. Sazmer is currently weakest. However, they do have a very clear path to get some very strong culture production going. I would say Sazmer's main weakness right now is their science, but, you know, once they get their journalism, they'll have 4 science production, so even that won't be too bad. So I think Sazmer, as long as they can make sure to keep up in military, is definitely in a position to get some Shakespeare culture production going and kind of run away with the game. As for me, my economy situation is looking pretty fine. I managed, even despite being hit by so many strength events, I did manage to fix that at least. And my strength situation is soon going to look pretty good when I get some tactics going. The issue is that, you know, I'm behind culture and Fat Hope, and Sazmer is going to start running away with culture. So I think I actually, again, like, the strength events, the Ravages of Time, like, the event deck was very unkind to me in Age 2. But I think I managed to struggle to a place where my position looks pretty good. The problem is more that it's only pretty good. I don't have a decisive economic advantage over either of my opponents, and I also don't have a clear path to getting culture. So, however, I did draw this war. So I think the way things look for me right now is, especially with me having Napoleon, drawing this war, I felt my path towards at least finishing second, if not potentially winning this game, is definitely by pushing strength really hard and hopefully being able to get a big war going against at least one of my opponents. Fat Hope, again, is looking for government. Sazmer is going to be looking to get the Shakespeare culture going and then defend themselves as best they can. Fat Hope Seeds reveals an international agreement. Fat Hope decides to take it. Even though they're only able to take 1 card because of their hand space issues, this is a very powerful card that they can take at least. They upgrade 1 mine, take Nobel, a strong leader, also the only Age 2 leader left for them, as well as a cavalryman to give them the full suite of Age 2 military techs. Sazmer doesn't see it as good. They build a journalism as well as a knights to compete in strength some more, and they take a bunch of yellow cards as well. Their science situation is still looking pretty bad, so they do not want any of these techs, which makes sense. It's my turn. I don't see this as weakest. Instead, I try the scientific cooperation pact. I decide to offer it to Sazmer. Yeah, I mean, Sazmer, you know, will probably be getting a second journalism soon, so they'll have as much science production as me. So I figured that there's a good chance that Sazmer might want to accept the pact, whereas Fat Hope, especially once they lose Nobel, will be kind of suffering for science income. So I thought there was at least a decent chance that Sazmer would take the pact and cancel this promise of military protection, but they decided not to. I didn't want to see because I'm weakest. I am able to do what I mentioned before, although... Well, no, actually, because I had to build this arena. I am at least able to take this Air Forces, which was very important for my war plans. At this point, even though I don't have an H3 tactic, I am pretty set up for wars with the Air Forces. I decided not to save the patriotism for wars, but instead play it this turn. I think mainly because, I mean, look at the row. It's just text. I don't want most of these techs, and so just to be civil action efficient, you know, I decided to spend a civil action on the patriotism to play this cannon, now making me strongest, and then take this modern infantry, a potentially useful card in case I draw you know, the positional army, or what's this called, the entrenchments. So this card is just for potential H3 tactics, and also because I don't have anything else to do with my last level action. If I hadn't played the patriotism, what else would I have done? Like, taken, you know, I didn't want either of these. Fundamentalism, maybe, but, I mean, I'm gonna need to spend science on air forces, maybe military theory or modern infantry. I'm definitely not gonna have the science for the fundamentalism, so didn't really need it. I think this turn, in retrospect, also seems good. I decided to discard, you know, that war, the one territory, like, I'm not going to do. If I'm warring people at this point, it's going to be with the War for Culture, and the pact is just rejected, so. I end up drawing, another aggression, a plunder, and a second war, so the game is definitely telling me, war, 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 and an impactive population. But plays that revolutionary idea, which could have let them actually put their fundamentalism, but instead they just decide to upgrade a warrior. I think that, you know, it is true, like, Fat Hope doesn't have that much science income. Maybe they want science for Nobel Prizes, but Fat Hope's main weakness is having for civil actions. This is the government that's available to them right now, so I really think Fat Hope should have just taken it. Although it is true that Fat Hope's suffering from food as well. So maybe Fat Hope was just worried that if they play fundamentalism, they won't have enough science for both riflemen and mechanized agriculture. Which does make sense, but, you know, that's kind of, you know, kind of comes back to how Fat Hope played H2, right? Where Fat Hope didn't take the Republic when they could have. They didn't take a selective breeding when they could have. So they're left scrambling in H3 for those two really important parts of your civilization. Sazmar Seeds reveals a refugees that I'm able to win, and Sazmar loses. That's definitely nice. But Sazmar did have a free population for it, though. Sazmar builds that second journalism as well as a second theater. So Sazmar now has 16 cultural production. That is quite a lot. And Sazmar is also able to get the second copy of Air Forces. So Sazmar is definitely looking in a pretty good position. They're getting the Air Forces to help defend themselves, and they're starting to build a really huge culture lead. And they adopt the Hussar's tactic from Fat Hope as well. Just a better tactic all around. I see the popularization of science. I do want to see it since I'm strongest. Popularization of science is going to be a better sort of pseudo impact for me than either of these two impacts would. I reveal an economic progress. Unfortunately, it helps me less than it helps my opponents. At least it helps me a little bit. I'm able to finish my second tactic. Yeah, I don't want to war yet. There's going to be 3 turns left in the game, so there's no reason to war right now. I want to wait until next turn when I'll have enough science for the Air Forces. And my plan is definitely like full war no matter what, so I take these 2 resource yellow cards. However, the last card to take was a little tricky for me. I think there are 3 main options. The most obvious option is definitely the military theory. While I probably will want to play the Air Forces next turn, the military theory may very well be helpful for me. I'll be able to play it, you know, 3 turns from now, which will probably be in time for one last war. I could even potentially play it earlier if I manage to get one of the 2 remaining revolutionary ideas. However, there's an argument to taking one of these other cards. I'll explain. One of these is Gandhi, right? And at the current point in time, whoever gets Gandhi, I wouldn't be able to war. So I think one option is to just take Gandhi myself. Obviously not to play him anytime soon, but just to make sure my opponents can't have him. And then just wait until the final turn, and the final turn I would just play him and get 2 culture out of him. I think that's definitely defensible. Another option is to take either the movies or the rockets. It doesn't really matter this one. Presumably, probably the rockets though, since I'm going military. The reason being that if I take the rockets, then even if Fat Hope doesn't take Gandhi, Gandhi will be discarded after Fat Hope's turn, and so Sazmar won't be able to take him. I think both of those could definitely, like I said, be very defensible in their own ways. However, this military theory is also definitely potentially very valuable to me, because, like I said, should be able to play it before the end of the game, and definitely if I manage to get one of the 2 remaining revolutionary ideas. And I figured with the military theory, I will have, you know, if Napoleon manages to stick around, I will have 8 military actions plus a patriotism, so I would actually be able to get a pretty nice war going against Gandhi. I would still have a lot of military actions left after declaring the war. So I thought that with the military theory and the patriotism, I wasn't too worried about one of my opponents having Gandhi, and plus it's a 3-player game. Even if one of my opponents does take Gandhi, I could still war the other. I also wasn't necessarily expecting, I mean, maybe I'll be able to beat Sazmer, but it was looking a little difficult at this point, so I was even kind of thinking maybe first place would be hard for me anyway, and I should more aim for second, and again, just war whoever doesn't take Gandhi. So that's why I figured this is just such a good card for me, and obviously these are going to be really helpful for me in wars, so that's why I didn't bother trying to deny Gandhi to one or more of my opponents. The impact population would definitely be really bad for me. The bonus card, I'm not planning on winning any colonies anymore. I don't want to lose any military units at this time and putting it all into war. So I figured I don't need the bonus card anymore. And I drew another bonus card. I think this is another raid and a third war. So some games I play, I don't draw any wars ever in Age 3. Other games I draw one a turn. That's how it goes sometimes. Fat Hope offers me an international tourism. That's understandable. I definitely look to be in a worse position than Sazmer right now. I was happy to take it. I actually directly benefit from this pact because Fat Hope has 3 wonders and I only have 2. Fat Hope finally gets some food production going, as well as builds another rifleman. Sazmer Seas reveals the freedom of movement. Takes the tanks, upgrades one's a tank, and takes a military build-up and a military theory again. Sazmer's strategy is pretty clearly, you know, defend yourself as best as possible, which definitely makes sense. Sazmer used freedom of movement to get rid of this philosophy and put it in journalism instead, which also makes sense. And they upgrade more tanks. So it's my turn. I have 3 wars in my hand, so there's no reason not to use one of them at this point. I don't really have any other cards I want anyway. I just want to spend the rest of my game warring as much as I can. The question is more who to war against. So the thing is that Fat Hope does have a lot of resources, however they don't have a lot of military actions. And we all, and not only they passed up the fundamentalism, both of the military theories were taken. Their only hope of getting more military actions is the communism. Which is unlikely to, which is not going to be on the road by the time I declare the war. And so because of that, and even if there is a communism, that'll be the only card that Fat Hope can play. They won't be able to play either of these other cards. And so basically that means that Fat Hope's potential strength of threatening isn't that much because they only have 4 military actions to play it with. Sazmer, on the other hand, is one-sided short of playing air forces, but they are able to play the military theory. So Sazmer would be able to play the military theory and with the reserves, potentially 10 rocks with military build-up, build a ton of tanks. Maybe you could argue that even though Sazmer is going to be able to protect themselves much better than Fat Hope can, Sazmer is also obviously going to be ahead of Fat Hope really soon. So maybe if I want to get first, I want to just war Sazmer from now on. But I was kind of feeling that with Sazmer having the military theory, all these yellow cards, you know, these tanks in the air forces, and having such a big culture lead, I was feeling that it seemed unlikely that I would be able to overtake Sazmer. Another consideration is that I have this premise of military protection, which will go away if I war Sazmer. And so if I want to keep the 4 strength for a war, I need to war Fat Hope first, and that ultimately is why I decided to war Fat Hope first. This is going to be a pretty big war. There's going to be quite a big war. Maybe it will even get me a larger culture swing than a war against Sazmer would have, although I didn't actually calculate that. I probably should have, but it will at least pretty much guarantee me that I'll finish second at least. I'm able to build 2 air forces, and I'm willing to destroy a mine for it because I'm going to be taking Bill Gates. Bill Gates definitely seemed to be the best possible leader for me. Oh yeah, it should be mentioned. I was a little surprised that neither of my opponents took Gandhi, so that seemed kind of risky to me that neither of them took him, but I was also definitely happy to see that neither of them are having Gandhi. Will make warring much easier for me. Bill Gates, I figured, you know, I want to keep Napoleon as long as possible for his strength bonus and the military action, and so I felt that, you know, whichever Age 3 leader I take, I'm going to elect at the end of the game. Bill Gates will provide me with a little bit of rocks. He will compensate for the fact that I'm going to have to wreck my economy to get these wars going. You'll note I use freedom of movement to move a worker from Iron to Cannon. For free, basically saving me 3 rocks because I'm losing the 2 rock production, but I'm getting a free cannon out of it. Obviously, next turn I'm planning to war again with 3 tactics. But anyway, the point is bookers got me a little rocks and also a little bit of science at the end. That seemed like a lot more value than something any of the other leaders would offer me. Also, it's available for me right now. I'm not playing him yet, though. Instead, I'm taking this revolutionary idea because, again, it'll let me play the military theory next turn. Just got the bonus card for reasons already stated. Draw a good pack that I'm almost certainly not going to offer. Fed Up Seeds reveals a popularization of science that is kind of equal for everyone. It looks like the best that Fed Up can do to defend is doing this, which only gets and building an arena. Unfortunately, this only gets Fed Up up to 41 strength. Again, we're seeing the downsides of Fed Up being on despotism for so long. Sazmar Seeds reveals an immigration that doesn't hit anyone. Sazmar takes the internet, is able to play military, build up full value to get some more tanks going, and indeed builds more tanks. I think this is definitely the right choice. Internet, now, however, it is notable that Sazmar took this internet. It cost Sazmar 3 civil actions. Sazmar could have spent those 3 civil actions, and maybe Sazmar didn't have to increase the population to avoid corruption either. I didn't see that. But maybe Sazmar could have actually taken, instead of taking the internet and popped, could have taken both of these yellow cards instead to really ensure that Sazmar will be protected. The internet is maybe a little bit greedy. I mean, I think at this point, after the war, Fat Hope isn't going to be a threat to Sazmar, so it kind of seems to me that Sazmar doesn't actually need a wonder to win the game, right? As long as Sazmar defends against any wars from me or from Fat Hope, then Sazmar's cultural protection will just win them away with the game. So I think this internet is actually quite greedy, and Sazmar should have taken these yellow cards instead to help ensure they will be able to protect themselves. Anyway, I get 23 goals from Fat Hope after the war, and so at this point, you know, I could war Fat Hope again. I definitely would have been able to win another war against Fat Hope, but I was very confident that I would get second over Fat Hope at this point, so my goal now was just to try to potentially win the game by getting 2 more wars going against Sazmar. I at least have a chance at it. Because I'm able to play the military theory, and I have enough rocks to build 2 more swordsmen after, again, destroying my mine. I finished destroying my mines instead of my farms. If I had destroyed a farm, I would have been in famine. And instead, by destroying my mines, yeah, I also didn't destroy a farm last turn, so I would have 7 food so I could increase my population this turn. And by taking this patriotism and this reserves, I will still have enough rocks, obviously, next turn to build my 3rd Air Force, which is the last thing that I'll need for my final war. Which means I don't have to play Bill Gates yet, and I can still keep strengthening Napoleon. I did do some calculations to make sure that I would be able to, that Sazmar isn't able to win this war against me, no matter what they do. I won't go over these calculations now, but yeah, it'll be a close war, but Sazmar isn't able to overtake me in strength. I guess unless there's an iconoclasm, but again, I was willing to risk that because this is my only way of potentially winning the game against Sazmar. I draw an Impact of Wonders, Impact of Harmony, and an Armed Intervention. Fat Hope Seeds reveals a wealthy territory. This was scary. I think Sazmar... I actually don't think Sazmar could have defended, even if Sazmar had won this territory, but it would have been good for them. Basically an extra 2 rocks. So I was thankful that Fat Hope won it instead. And Fat Hope is finally able to get a government going, thankfully, this democracy. And they also... build the Cavalryman. Cavalryman is looking like they're hoping to be able to survive a war from me or potentially even Sazmar. Yeah, Sazmar is also in a position to war Fat Hope potentially, so Fat Hope definitely still has to worry about their military situation. They do take our reserves from Sazmar though, which is nice. Sazmar Seeds reveals an impact of architecture. This is actually, I think, one of the few impacts that's like neutral for me against Sazmar. Sazmar, interestingly, decides to build a 3rd temple, and then, after building another tank, builds 1 stage of the internet. So here's, well, I have to keep in mind, Antiques Chaplain, which makes sense, but here's the thing. So, Sazmar just spent 4 rocks building this theater and building the stage of the internet. And you'll notice, well, there are no resource yellow cards, but that means that next turn Sazmar will have 10 rocks. If Sazmar hadn't done these 2 things, it didn't get them out of corruption either. So Sazmar did not have to build this temple or the stage of the internet. Then they would have had 14 rocks next turn, which would have been enough for 2 air forces. Because they did these instead, Sazmar will only have enough rocks for 1 air force next turn. I think that is absolutely, like, unquestionably a mistake to me. Maybe Sazmar thought that, you know, I was unlikely to have a third war, but obviously I could have. I did. And I think that Sazmar, again, Sazmar definitely doesn't need this third drama to win. Sazmar really doesn't need this internet to win either. They still have a significant culture lead over me after the war resolved. After the war resolves, all they need to do to win is make sure I can't get a war against them and just win off of the culture production. Also, you know, taking Gandhi would have potentially helped there too, although I did end up with a lot of military actions anyway. So I think Sazmar was probably right not to take Gandhi, because he wouldn't really have helped Sazmar that much. But I think taking the internet in the first place and also spending resources on it in this drama were definitely mistakes. All Sazmar should have done was worry about the military at this point in the game. So yeah, I get 16 culture from Sazmar, and of course I do have that third war that I definitely declared against Sazmar. I'm still, you know, I mean, I'm technically ahead right now, but if I let Sazmar finish this internet uncontested, then Sazmar will definitely win. So I really have no choice but to do this war if I want to win. And it's not like there was particularly anything else I could have done with my resources anyway. I devoted my entire civilization to war in this game. There's no reason not to play Bilgeist this turn, because Napoleon will be dead by the time the war resolves anyway. I am able, again, to build this third air forces, going up to 81 strength. I take the democracy and the revolutionary idea. I felt that this... I could have taken the reserves instead, but I kind of thought about it, and I felt that nothing I could have done with this 4 rocks would have given me more culture, probably, than just the 3 free culture from democracy. So that's why I decided to just go for democracy instead. And on my last civil action, I played the reserves. I didn't want these cards. My science is going into democracy next turn. So just to make sure I have enough civil actions to do things next turn, there's no reason not to play the reserves for rocks this turn. I draw 2 tactics and a bonus card. Age 4 begins. Both of my opponents lose their leaders. Fed-up Siege reveals an impact of culture. This is the worst possible impact for me, unfortunately. Well, I think impact of science would also... No, impact of science wouldn't be as bad, because I would have gotten at least 7 off of it. So yeah, impact of culture is definitely the worst possible impact. It gives Sazmar 14 points against me. Fat Hope. Looks like they're still worried about the military. I mean, it looks like there's not really anything else they can do anyway with their resources. Maybe this is also a sign that impact of competition is in the deck. Sazmar, because of the war, isn't able to finish the internet. Instead, all they can do is build an air forces and a knights. Again, this shows, like, they could have... building this stage of the internet ended up giving them nothing. Building this temple ended up giving them, what, 6 culture? Which is a lot less than the second air force would have been, which would have saved them a 20 culture swing. I am able to just barely win this war, but again, I think the main utility of this war... I mean, an 18 culture swing is definitely not nothing, and it also stopped Sazmar from finishing the internet. None of these impacts were good for me, so I just decided to do an aggression. I can't... Unfortunately, can't succeed in an aggression against Sazmar, so it does have to be against Fat Hope. I considered doing a raid or a plunder, but I thought about it, and I thought that there wasn't really anything that those rocks would have given me anyway. Definitely not more than the extra 7 culture from the armed intervention. As said, I am able to play democracy, and what I do decide to do, so... It's kind of a difficult decision in a lot of ways, because, by disbanding the swordsman, I can no longer win a potential impact of strength. But by disbanding it, I am able to do other things that you're about to see that will help me with impacts. So basically thought, well... It is true doing this means I won't win impact of strength, but, like, maybe one of my opponents, I guess Sazmar could have ceded the impact of strength with the expectation that I would have to disband the swordsman, but that felt pretty risky to me. Maybe Sazmar also ceded it because they wanted to make sure they could beat Fat Hope, but I mean, they are for sure beating Fat Hope anyway, so their only real competition is me at this point. It felt relatively unlikely that Sazmar, and certainly Fat Hope, had ceded the impact of strength. Where some other potential impacts that I can help prepare myself for felt a lot more likely. So that's why I decided to disband the swordsman. The first thing I did was build a temple. I mean, I have to in order to not be in but no, I don't have to in order to not be in Uprising, but it's better than just leaving a population idle. It also helps with impact of happiness, and it helps with impact of variety, and it just gives me a culture from the temple, so it just seemed like a really high value building to build. And I decided to also build a farm by disbanding the swordsman, because by building this farm, I'm able to get backup over consumption, and it will give me a potential +6 for an impact of agriculture. And an impact of agriculture definitely seemed pretty likely with Fat Hope having the mech ags, and even Sasmer having Machu Picchu. So that's why I decided to do these two things. Again, impact of agriculture, impact of happiness, impact of variety all seem more likely to me than impact of strength. But that is also all that I can really do with my actions other than take some cards. So before the final impacts, oh shit, sorry. Basically, I because of my 3 wars and my 2 wars against Sasmer, I somehow managed to end up slightly ahead of Sasmer before the final impacts. But I'm also pretty badly prepared for most impacts, so I was quite nervous before they started. I'll at least get a little Bill Gates boost at the end, but there's definitely, and also I think, yeah, none of the impacts are from me either, so I had no idea which impacts might have been in the deck. So I was pretty nervous. The first impact revealed, though, did at least show that I made the right choice in building that farm, because it is indeed impact of agriculture. Building that farm gave me an extra 6 culture from it, and means that I'm still, as you can see, 15 culture ahead of Sasmer. Next, though, is the impact of strength. I was surprised by this. Presumably seeded by Sasmer. Definitely a right decision by Sasmer. I don't know if Sasmer predicted that I would destroy my army. Maybe they did. I mean, I did need to do something to get out of Uprising, so it's probably a reasonable prediction to make. Regardless, though, that gives Sasmer 7 points against me. I am now only 8 culture ahead of Sasmer. The next impact, though, is a good impact for me. It's an impact of government. This actually gives me 3 points above Sasmer. This is some extra value I got from the democracy that I didn't know about previously. So now I'm 11 points ahead of Sasmer. Next, though, is a bad impact for me. Is the impact of industry, giving me 0 points because I destroyed all my mines. Now Sasmer is only 5 points behind me. I guess 9 after the Bill Gates, but still, there's a lot of impacts that can make up for 9 points. But the impact of happiness is not one of them. I am, again, rewarded for my play on the final turn by building that temple. I actually get 2 points above Sasmer with this, and then after the Bill Gates bonus, I end the game having won by 11 culture. This game was a tricky one, and definitely after that one turn in H2 when I was hit by 3 strength events in a row, I definitely felt that I might be losing this game. I'll say, looking back through it, on the one hand, I think I did play pretty well. I honestly feel my biggest mistake in retrospect was that turn where I didn't take the alchemy. I don't really have any strong objections to how I played in either H2 or H3, and I think that I did a good job recovering from the, frankly, horrendous event deck luck in H2. Admittedly, drawing that defensive army was the best card I could have possibly drawn, especially that turn, so drawing that defensive army does balance out the luck somewhat. I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but I guess maybe from that perspective I shouldn't complain too much. I think without the defensive army I definitely would not have won this game if I hadn't drawn the defensive army even that turn, frankly. I maybe could have struggled to get second, but definitely wouldn't have won the game without the defensive army. That being said, even with that luck of having the defensive army, I think I did a good job of recovering from the way the event deck treated me and putting myself in like a decent position at the beginning of H3. And because I was in a decent position, I was able to, once I started drawing wars, just devote myself entirely to preparing for wars and building up my military. That being said, I have to say, looking back through, that I was only able to win because of my opponent's mistakes. I think Sasmer in particular absolutely could have won the game, and Sasmer just played too greedily in those last few turns by taking the internet instead of the resource yellow cards. But then, even after taking the internet, if Sasmer hadn't just spent these 4 rocks unnecessarily on that one turn, and then instead left themselves open the option to build the air forces, we saw that Sasmer built the knights instead of the air forces, and the knights gave them only 2 extra strength, right? Because they already had 8 tanks. Whereas the air forces would have given them 10 extra strength. So if they had built an Air Forces instead of a Knights, they would have, that would have been a +8 strength for them, and that would have saved them a 16 culture swing against me. Now, they would have lost 6 culture from having not built the drama. I think, actually, it would have only been 4 culture, because they could have built the drama... No, yeah, 6 culture. So, they did, No, it was... Right, because they built it on the second to last turn, and... Right. They wouldn't have been able to build. So it cost them 6 culture. So they would have gotten a 16 culture swing, but building the drama so they would have had 10 more culture against me if they had saved up for the Air Forces instead. So technically I still would have won, but it only would have been by 1 point. So obviously it would have been a lot closer and with a few different impacts than Sazmer would have won. And I think if Sazmer hadn't taken the internet at all and had instead taken the resource yellow cards, at least one of them, then Sazmer definitely would have won. So, I do think that Sazmer played too greedily in those last few turns, like pushing culture a bit more. I think at that stage, Sazmer's only way of losing was me getting wars against them, and Sazmer would never have lost peacefully. So Sazmer should have just devoted themselves entirely to defending themselves at that point in the game, and not bothered with like this internet stuff. So, that makes me feel like a bit worse that I kind of only finished first in this game because of opponent mistake, frankly. That being said, though, you know, capitalizing on your opponent's mistakes is a skill too, and I think that at the very least I would have finished second, even if Sazmer had not taken the internet. And like after the way H2 went, finishing second still I think would have been a good result. But obviously finishing first is even better. But before ending the video, we'll take a quick look at the standings. So here are the live standings for my group. As you can see, Sazmer and Cleveland have already finished their 2-player game, which Sazmer won. But if you think back to before Sazmer won that game, they had 8 points. Fat Hope had 10 points. I have 27. I'm 17 points ahead of Fat Hope, who was second, which means that even if Fat Hope won all 3 of their 2-player games, that would only give them 12 points. And so even if I lost all my 2-player games, I would still finish ahead of them, meaning that no matter how the 2-player games go in this group, I am guaranteed to finish first and move on to the upper stage in the next round. So while there are still certainly reasons for me to want to win those 2-player games, I'll discuss those more in my next video about the World Championships. It's still always nice to take that load off and not have to stress about finishing first in the group. Kinda relax a little bit until the next stage starts and I get stressed all over again. Now, those 2-player games I'm in, they're all kind of in end of Age 1, beginning of Age 2 right now, so it'll be a little while before I can make videos on them. I do have ideas for what to do for videos in the meantime, though, so I'm still planning on uploading, you know, relatively frequently, at least for a little while, until I get tired of it, but right now I'm having fun making videos. So, look forward to future videos soon. As always, if you have any comments or constructive criticism on either my video making or my gameplay, I'm looking to improve in both areas. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.